You're listening to the So Tell Us podcast.
With David Feinberg and Jared McCallie. How was that, David?
Man.
Oh,
Ugh.
that is Chip in a nutshell right there.
That's Chip, baby.
Did you know that Chip, do you know Chip? I tried to do it and I can't. It's just trying to force it. We can't force it. We're so bad at it.
Chip?
Yeah. No, it's great though. Chip is a good representation of Philadelphia comedy. He's not like some edgelord. He's not super dirty. He's just kind of doing comedy that's funny. And I mean, I've looked up to Chip like since I started comedy in Philadelphia. I feel like I don't know. And then he's like one of those people that's like you're like, oh, that's a comedian in Philadelphia, and then he's on like the Todd Glass show and Doug Loves Movies, and you're like, oh, this guy's doing it. So I don't know.
Oh yeah, he's one of those comedians that I feel like is a cornerstone. When comedians come to Philly, they know that they can like reach out to him. Like he just like pops up and he's like respected by people that like really know comedy. I feel like he's definitely. I don't think he's on an elite list of comedians that have met my mom, but he is on a very short list of comedians I would be comfortable having meet my mom.
Okay, all right, yeah. That hairdo is I'm gonna meet somebody's mom. That's Chip's
Oh my
hairdo.
god, yeah.
Yeah, at all times. Yeah.
He's definitely he's got a firm handshake.
I didn't say this on the episode. I didn't say this on the episode, but one of the first times I saw Chip do comedy, he was wearing a hoodie and it said the Vermont Comedy Club, and I was like, man, that's got to be great. Just walk into a comedy club and they give you a hoodie. Like that's the level I'm at where I'm like,
that's a young comedian. That's what a young comedian is striving for, is just being handed anything in the world.
Yeah.
Just please give me something.
But
I remember.
Oh, sorry.
Oh no! I was just thinking about like I remember when I worked at Helium, like they gave you like a free drink at the end of the night.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I was like 21 and I was so fucking stupid. And I applaud them for like bringing me along, because I would be like, you get a fucking free drink at the end of the night. Woo wee, we get to work at a comedy club. I'm surprised why didn't no one at that job punch me directly in my face? Just like, just be like, all right, we made $20. Whoopee! Like,
I love that. Punch you in the face, though. Our guest today, Chip Chantry.
Yeah.
Not a guy who punches people in the face. You know what he punches people in the face with?
Don't do this.
Jokes.
Oh, God. Yuck. Yuck and gross.
Oh, this is so us, David.
This is so us. Honestly, if anyone's listening, thanks for listening to the podcast. This is we're really excited about recording this episode, because this is someone that like really is a person that Jared and I both look up to, and that is such a staple of this scene. And we think that in this episode especially, you're going to hear some really great stories and a lot of really good insight from someone that obviously really has a mature and nuanced appreciation of comedy in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think this is one of our most educational episodes, I would say. The stuff that he talks about, really, as anybody who's a young comic or a comic who's like bummed right now or anything, he just kind of like lays it out there that like there's bumps in the road and you'll do what you'll do and whatever happens. I don't know. He's kind of like almost Zen that way, but not that he's not some hippy dippy freak. You know?
Not like somebody. Just quit listening to this podcast if you're a hippy dippy freak. I don't want no long hair hippies.
You're buying hemp oil.
What are you gonna recycle your toothbrush after this, huh?
Yeah.
You're gonna recycle your toothbrush?
Is Dr. Bronner even a doctor?
You can put that where the sun don't shine. Yeah. All right, here now. Let me take one stab at it. So we hope that you'll enjoy the episode as much as we enjoyed making it. So here now is So Tell Us presents Chip Chantry.
That was great, David. Okay, all right. We are we're all systems go, baby.
Yeah. Chip, where are you calling us from today? Where do you call home? Are you in Philly?
I'm in Southern Philadelphia right now. Well, South Philly.
No
Yeah,
kidding.
I'm in the heart of the Italian market. I'm a block off of the Italian market. So
No shit.
10th and Christian, baby. Yeah.
Oh wow. It's a changed
There.
area. It's a very changed area of the Italian
Oh
market.
boy, here he goes.
It is.
No, I remember going there as a kid and then just being like, my dad being like, this is where it all happens. And now I just go there and I'm like, it's like a bookstore and a couple of places with fish. You know?
Exactly. Yeah. It's just changed just a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's
Chip,
great. I do love it.
Do you know Joe Tuzzi? I think he lives right off of the Italian market. He's a comic, yeah.
We our dogs run into each other sometimes. We see each other walking dogs.
No kidding.
Yeah. So he's just a couple blocks from me.
He's a lovely guy, and I
he's
love
the best.
the place where he is really cool. He's got a great apartment, but I also feel like I once ran into him on like Italian Market Day or like South Philly Day or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
He's like a perfect person to run into when you're like in the midst of all that, you know. I feel like he's just a nice pause piece, you know.
I don't want to speak out of turn, but I feel like he's a delight as a human being. He's one of those people where I've never been like, oh, here comes Joe. It's like, oh, this is going to be delightful for 5 minutes because I get to talk to him. I love him. He's great. And I feel like I saw him last year at the Italian Market Festival too. So by the way, and that's one of the biggest kicks in the teeth because I don't know if you guys are aware, there's a pandemic happening right now, but I don't know how much you keep up with the news. But yeah, I don't want to scare you. But that was, and obviously I'm glad that that we're staying safe and people are staying safe. But one of the biggest kicks in the gut was the Italian Market Festival being canceled this year because that's our favorite weekend of the year. It happens to be I just celebrated my 3rd wedding anniversary and we got married on Italian Market weekend. And like we literally have pictures, like some of our wedding photos are in the Italian Market with like a bunch of crazy drunk people running around. So that's
awesome.
Yeah.
Everybody's hand is just like this in the picture.
Just everybody's just carrying buckets of mozzarella and But it's our favorite weekend and we always have like it's just, and we're a block off the market. So we usually have a big breakfast. We just have a bunch of people in and it's sort of like everybody's just in and out of our house all day out down on the market. And it's always so much fun. And we had to miss it this year, but hey, there are worse things in the world.
Yeah, very worse.
I was going to say, Chip, you've been in Philadelphia for a long time then, huh?
Yeah, basically my whole life. I grew up in the burbs, and then I've lived in the city since, I guess, 2009, maybe. You know, moved into the city itself. Is that when
you started comedy?
I started a little bit before that. I started in 2004, maybe, 2004. So it's been a little over 15 years. I took a stand-up class. And so then I was doing it. I was kind of commuting in from the suburbs, and then I was working in the suburbs too, and I wanted to distance myself as much as I could from my job, from my suburban life, and be like, I want to give it all to the city, give it all to comedy. So I was like, because you know how it is, like if you're in the burbs, like it's February, it's cold, you had a long day at work, and you're like, I could go to an open mic on a Tuesday, or I could just stay home and watch TV. And I didn't want that choice anymore. So I was like, if I'm in the city, I'm going to walk 3 blocks to the open mic. I'm going to do it. And that was a big jump for me. And then I've been here ever since. I've lived in Connecticut, writing on a show for a little while. I lived in LA last year for about 6 months working on a show. But other than that, I've been right here in Philly.
That's awesome. And for us, like, I feel like that feeling is like, when you're commuting into the city to do an open mic it's like such a chore, but when you live here you just walk 6 blocks and you know people are going to be there. It's a great feeling.
Exactly. You have to park, you have to worry about all that, and then it's like when I started, to date myself, there was nothing happening in Philadelphia. I mean, it was just in Center City itself, there was almost no stand up, there was no Helium, there was no Fit, no Good, no bar shows really. There was the Laugh House on South Street, and that was pretty much the only game in Center City. So I took a stand-up class with, and I met these guys in the class, but Johnny Goodtimes, who's a big Quizzo guy in the city, he started out doing stand-up and still involved in the comedy scene. And this guy, Dan Goodman, who is a comedian up in New York now. But the three of us were like, well, we have to make something happen. There are no shows. So we started an open mic on Monday nights. It was at Finn McCool's, which is at 12th and Sansom, right across from Fergie's. And it was like, it's nice now, but it was this dive bar. I mean, it was just this awful bar. The nicest Greek guy who owns the place, this guy Pete, sweetest guy in the world, he just let us have the night on Monday nights, but we would be preempted by Monday Night Football. So literally, like, half the time we'd have to wait until the Monday Night Football game was over and then start. So we'd be starting like 10 p.m. earliest. Earliest.
Oh God.
Wow.
And it was a mix of, the crowd was, and literally we had, we joke about this, but it's totally true. Our stage was in the corner of the bar, and it was just the one floor, and it was a shitty little bar. We had a pallet, like a loading pallet, like a wooden, and we had covered it with some black cloth we found. We just stapled the black cloth to it. And that was our stage for about a year, until the owner's son decided that it was taking too much room downstairs. So he cut the pallet in half, and we had half a pallet was our stage.
Wow.
And our light was one of those painter's lamps, one of those with the silver dome that was the hook. And then the mic system was basically just, Johnny had an amp, like a little almost guitar amp that he used for Quizzo that he would talk into, a little mic. And that was it. And then our audience was audience for the open mic. It was a couple of comics, and then it was the regular drunks at the bar, who most of them hated us, drunk people from the convention center who were at some convention, and like homeless people would just wander in and heckle us. And that was my first 3 years of comedy, basically every Monday night. And I would drive in, do that show, not finish up the open mic until 1 a.m. on a Monday, and then have to drive almost an hour home, and then wake up 4 hours later to go teach a bunch of fourth graders, because I was teaching at the time, and it was the worst. But that's how I got my chops. And awesome. Nothing can hurt me now. And I mean, you guys know that as comedians, like, we build up that skin and that callus around our hearts, that I bombed so bad and was just heckled by so many people, and they just vehemently hated us so much for 3 years. And I was exhausted on top of it, and just questioning everything. And I'm like, why am I doing this? And after that, like, I can, like, nothing hurts me anymore. I can do that. So it was such a valuable experience.
A lot of people use this word class. So the class of people that you come from, the comics who talk about the Laugh House. It's amazing the amount of comics that, there was a show you did. I was helping a friend, Eddie Finn, run sound. It was like Wiz City Comedy Festival. Do you remember that?
Yeah. Down on South Street at the, I see that guy Bill Arrowwood every once in a while. At the cinema, right?
Yeah.
Cinema, yeah.
That guy's such a nice guy too. Like,
best dude.
That guy, he used to let, when it was super cold nights, like there was an ordinance in Philadelphia, he would let homeless people come in and just watch movies all night. He would stay up all night. Like, shout out to that guy.
That's
anyway,
awesome.
People talking about the Laugh House, and I was just there, and it's like, when you're a starting comedian and you're kind of in the conversation, you're just standing adjacent to comedians. And I mean, like, I was a comic, but I was just like, I'm not going to interject, but I will listen. And it was like Ian Fidance and Chris Cotton was an amazing comic. Rest in peace.
Yeah.
And they were just talking about the Laugh House and stuff. And then I listened to a Todd Glass episode where he talked about, he went once, I think, but Joe DeRosa was talking about the Laugh House, and just the amount of people that went through there, and such a place that I've only heard such a little amount about. It's just awesome to think of that comedy history and how it built in Philadelphia, and then the people that have come from that you, so I would say Cotton, Pat House, Ian Fidance, Joe DeRosa. It's an amazing class that you're a part of. It's really cool for us.
And those guys were great too. Like, that was kind of like my class, like, especially like, me and Pat House started right after me. Like, I remember Pat was 19, Temple student. he would come out on Monday nights to that Fimmicools open mic. So it was like me and Pat, and we were roommates for a while. And David James came out of that thing too. Dave and I were roommates for a while. And then, yeah, like Fidance and Cotton came just after us. And then like DeRosa and Big J and Mike Vecchione came like a couple years before us. So they were all big Laugh House guys. And I still remember, it's funny because DeRosa, we have a weird history. DeRosa and I know Joe, we met in college because I was dating a girl in college that he was high school friends with. So before either of us were comics, we were both in college. He's, I think, a year or two ahead of me. And we were just in college, like home on the summers. And I'd like be hanging out with my girlfriend, and he would be there. I was like, oh, this is a funny, cool guy. And then years later, after I break up with this girl, I was at the Laugh House one night, and it's one of my first open mics. I don't know what I'm doing. And I had literally one of those, because it's pre-smartphones, one of those cassette recorders with like the tiny mini cassettes.
Okay, yeah.
You know? And I wanted to record my set, and of course nobody's there. And I just had it on my table, and I just turned to him and I recognized him. I was like, I think that's that guy Joe that he didn't really recognize me. And I was like, hey man, could you just watch my recorder? He's like, oh yeah, sure, whatever. And he just like walked out, and like I was just some kid. I was like, why am I bothering this dude? And then but then he became like a thing, and he was so funny. He was one of those guys that I was watching, and he moved to New York like just as I was really getting started. So like I kind of saw him a few times, and he was such a nice guy. And then we've since worked together a bunch of times, and I just saw him out in LA last year, and he's the best. He's so funny. But like Vecchione came through that. Like that's how I met Vecchione, and those guys just, and they took the jump, and they went up and made it big.
Yeah, that's really Vecchione is becoming a new fan. I didn't really know about Vecchione, and then I listened to him on a podcast, and he's from an Italian family as well. And everything that he said, he just has this storytelling where it's like, oh, he's been through some shit. Like
yes.
he's an awesome comic, which is amazing. Which brings me to
we did an episode. I did an episode of his podcast like maybe about 2 years ago. We were both up at the Mohegan Sun in Wilkes-Barre, just the casino gig. It's actually, as far as casino gigs go, it's actually a pretty decent gig. And he's like, hey, do you want to do an episode of my podcast? And I was like, sure. So he set the mics up in his hotel room, and he's like, I don't know what I want to do with this. Like, I want to do this episode a little differently. Just like, let's just screw around. And I was like, yeah, let's just have fun. And then we're talking about like, should we do it weird? Should we do it or whatever? And then he's like, oh, he's like, I'm just going to press play. And he's like, let's pretend that we don't know it's recording. And we're just going to talk about what we're going to talk about. And then he just starts talking about the most terrible things. I was like, well, yeah, but don't talk about that on the podcast. And then we just kind of kept one-upping each other. He's like, well, yeah, you think this terrible thing, right? I'm like, oh yeah, but like I wouldn't say that on the podcast. And it just kept up, and then I was like, and it was a lot of fun. He's
that's
so
awesome.
Yeah.
Keeping with that theme though, this is David and my favorite question on the podcast. Actually, it doesn't have to be you. It could be anybody you've witnessed. Biggest bomb. But if it's yours, that's the best for us. But like if you've watched one where whatever you want to talk about, it's completely fine. But we love this question. I
do love watching a bomb. Like watching a bomb is one of my favorite things in the world. Like I hate to say because we've all been there though. Like a brand new comic who thinks they're going to swing for the fences and this is going to be great. And then like, Schadenfreude is it's the greatest. And I will say I wish I had more good bombing stories. And I feel like, and this is not, I've never I don't have a lot of bombs, but I've just had so many mediocre sets that I feel like are so much worse because you're just I almost want I want a confrontation, or I want to almost be able to blame the crowd, like they were terrible, or like what happened, or it's funny, and it was just like you get off stage and it was just a 4 out of 10, which is you want it just to be a 1 at that point, but you're just like I will say, okay, there's one though that I did. I got booked, another comic gave me this gig. It was last year, I think. So this is not too long ago. A year or two ago. I think it was last year. Yeah, because I had just gotten back in town, and I had gotten this gig, and it was for this Catholic organization, for this Catholic church. And like, I'm not Catholic, I'm not religious or anything, but it was down outside of Baltimore, and it was through Magooby's Comedy Club,
Okay, yeah.
which I never worked at. I was like, oh, maybe I can work at Magooby's. And so first of all, I was so the comedian in Philly like gave me the gig, and it was like a crazy. It was a Saturday at noon show, which is terrible right there.
Okay.
But it was $1,000, and I was like, I can't turn down $1,000 right now.
Following a clown, like
Exactly.
Yeah.
I wish.
Somebody
I
eating
wish.
lunch.
Yeah.
So I was trying to get information from the booker about the gig, but like he wasn't giving me much information. I'm driving down to the club for the first time ever. I've never been down to the club. So I finally, and I get there early because I'm professional, and then I'm like, is the show even here? There's nobody at the club. And so I'm trying to call people. I have no idea what's going on. Finally, some guy comes in, like the assistant manager, to like clean up. He's like, oh, I think I heard about that gig. That gig's not here. And then it was like at this like Catholic organization. It wasn't a church, but it was like some Catholic hall. And it was a couple miles away. So I had to speed to the place. And I was told it was it was right around St. Patrick's Day. And I was told it was the St. Patrick's Day luncheon. And so I just decided, all right, it's going to be a bunch of like older Catholic couples. So like, I'll try to do some marriage material, and I had to be squeaky clean. And I was like, okay, this is fine, like whatever. And I get there and they're like, oh, I think the organization is like the Happy Sons of St. Patrick or something like that. And I'm walking into the door and the guy finds me and he's like, yeah. And he's like, oh yeah, well, it's all men. It's only men, which I was not told. And so I have all this like couples stuff, because I figure I'm just picking from my jokes of like what's not cursing, what's clean, what's going to be over the plate for these people. And then it was just a bunch of drunk Irish dudes, and they literally they were drinking beer, but they also had these like giant mason jars of like moonshine whiskey.
Oh man.
That they were passing around. And there was a couple hundred people in this hall, like banquet style. And I was on a dais with like all of these, I don't know, Catholic, whoever. I was literally sitting next to the priest. The priest was and the priest was actually by far the coolest guy there the whole time. And it was, it aged from like guys in their 20s up through their 80s. And they were just drunk assholes. And they were just the worst. They were just like, just so angry. They were the worst. And then finally, after we had this big Irish lunch with like, bangers and mash and the whole thing. And then they did all of these long-winded speeches that these dudes aren't having at all. So like there's a priest talking and they're just talking over him, and I'm like, this is the worst. So finally they bring me up. I had to do like 20 minutes, and I get up there and I had prepared stuff. I even had my notes because it was on a dais, so at least I had a podium to hide behind. And they just hated me and were just like heckling me. And I was like, but I'm trying to like rewrite material but like I also couldn't be vicious to them because I have to be squeaky clean and likable enough to get paid. So I just sort of had to take it. And like I kind of went after people, but then they would get upset if I went after people, but then they're going after me. And it was the longest 20 minutes of my life. And I finally get done. And luckily the show's over at that point. And a few of the guys came up to me afterwards, like, oh yeah, you were pretty good. We always give all the comedian shit. They're like, whatever. And I'm like, okay, why am I even here? Like, this is just, I'm a punching bag. And then finally the guy gave me the check for $1,000, which I'm so thankful for, but he spelled my name wrong. And I was like, come on. And then he was like, oh, it's fine. And then he just crosses it out and rewrites.
No.
And then I have to go back and drive 2 hours home, wait for a couple of days, and hopefully the bank accepts it, because they're not going to pay me again. I know that. Like they're just going to be like, and I was like, so it wasn't even like, oh, I could just get out of there. I just had to let it simmer for like 3 days until I could get to the bank and actually make sure that it got deposited, which it did. It was fine, but it was $1,000 that I could have used. It was rent that month, but it was just the worst. And it's one of those things where you're just like, you just have to know what you're there for. And you're like, I'm not here to win any fans today. I'm not here to get all the laughs. I'm here to get out of here with my life and not offend somebody and get written up in some Catholic newspaper or whatever. And I don't want to get a fist fight, which definitely could have happened. Like these guys were drunk enough. There could have been fights. And I was like, I just need to get out with my life and just, and drive away as quickly as possible.
It's also funny to think, it's like, how did you spell Chip Chantry wrong? Like, it's kind of the easiest name to spell.
Well, you know what it was? So that Chip's not my real name. It's not my God-given name. But I've had the nickname since I was a baby, and I've never been able to shake it. But on my checks, I want my legal name on my first name on my checks. So he had written Chip and then crossed it out, and I was just like, and luckily they accepted it. But I was just like, this is the worst. Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. An op-ed piece in like the Catholic Boys Choir, like periodical leaflet. My God, what a strange place for bad PR is on God's dime,
Exactly.
My God.
That's
I was thinking about it is interesting because for Jared and I mean, we're very early on in the game, but it's like for someone like you who's been working for a long while at it, like your bomb stories are like financially tied, there's like something is at stake and at play here. But I was wondering, I mean, if you could think back to like the Laugh House years and things like that.
Yeah.
Thinking about yourself, how do you think that your style has changed? Like with the new album that's out and all that kind of stuff, how from then to now, how do you think that your style when you take to the stage is different?
And I will say, like, I loved the Laugh House, and it was, they wore their heart on their sleeve that they loved you, and they didn't. And I'll be honest, like, I didn't get to spend a lot of time around there. Like, I was more up at the comedy cabarets, like out on the outskirts, but I did the open mics and a couple of shows there. But from that early on, I think I'm a little bit more, I think the one thing that I've definitely learned is I'm more honest. Like, I was trying to be silly and cartoonish and crazy, and I'm now trying to be and jokey. Like, I consider myself a joke writer. Like, that's one thing. Like, I'm not putting myself up there as a comedian in general, but like, I feel like my joke writing instincts, like my skills, like I can put that up against most people and be like, I'm a good joke writer. And so that was always the focus of like having the great punchline or having the great hook. And then I realized that if I'm just honest and more vulnerable and tell real stories and just, it doesn't always have to be tied up perfectly in a bow of like setup, punchline, tagline, whatever. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if I can just tell a story or just say something funny and with an honest from my gut, like an honest observation, I think that I've really tried to do that a lot more. And I think that kind of comes through from my first to my second album. And even just from my second album, which was recorded a year and a half ago till now, like I've really tried to be honest actually in two ways. Is just be honest in my writing and be more vulnerable and be more like, let people see the blemishes rather than being afraid to like really expose my weaknesses or embarrassments or whatever. And then just being more open on stage too. And I think that's something that I wish I did a lot earlier. Is again, like I pride myself in being a good joke writer. So it was like, I trust my jokes. So I was always very prepared. I always did my homework. I had a set list, and this joke goes into this joke, and then this joke works well here, and then this joke, and I know they work because I've done the science on it and I've practiced them and they work. So here's my ironclad set list that's 7 minutes long or 30 minutes long or 45 minutes long. And that's how it's going to work. And then I realized that I wasn't connecting with crowds as much. Like, I was writing and saying good jokes, but the one thing that I've been trying to do more, especially in the last year or so, is really just be in the moment and be honest about what's happening in the moment, and just being, with the crowd. And like, whether it's crowd work, like I'll do more crowd work now. And it's not that you have to do crowd work, or just like talk about how you're feeling right now, or what's going on in the audience, or, today, it's pouring rain out. So like, let me just talk for 3 minutes about that. And do I have something funny that can come out of that? And the thing that I always realize, it's kind of like that bombing thing that I talked about earlier, which like with my jokes, like I can always do a pretty good job, but like a pretty good job isn't fun. Like I can usually be like I think on most nights a 7 or an 8, you know, and it's like the jokes work, people like me, and they're, you know, they're going well, but then I just would feel scripted after a while and not be in the moment. And then like even like recently, like if I'm doing an hour or 45 minutes or whatever, like I'll every once in a while like I'll be like 30 minutes in and people are laughing, but like I'm like, oh, I'm not. It's them and me,
Mhm.
2 separate spots, and like I'm not connecting. I'm telling stories about my life. I'm telling jokes, and they're I'm giving it to them, and they're laughing. But like, I don't feel that human interaction where I'm like, okay, let's just be real for a moment and like talk about something funny, and then that hits. So I've been trying to risk that more and be more like, instead of just like, okay, I can be a 7 or an 8 tonight. It's like I'm gonna shoot, and like some of those nights now it's a 10. Some of those nights it might be a 4 or a 2, but like it's, you know, I'm trying to trust myself more and be more honest.
That's awesome to hear actually, because I was taking, sounds very old. When I was taking my walk this morning, I was taking my
Oh, I've been doing that
Yeah.
with what's going on. Yeah, I go for my walk every morning. Yeah, yeah.
And
Oh,
I was
yeah.
like,
Eat
I
the
gotta,
birds, go for a walk.
I wanted to finish some of the tracks on the album, and I noticed that like you do this thing, and when I started comedy and I was maybe like 6 or 7 months in, whatever, someone was like, you need to be funny every 7 seconds, and I was like, oh my god, that's so hard. But you have this talkable likability that I think that is so awesome to see as a comic now, like 3 years in, where I'm like, I really like your comedy because you're like, I think in the goat thing, you're talking about goats. And before even like you set up the premise, but you do the thing where it's like, I could tell you were like setting it up and you're like, yeah, goats are better than dogs. That's just who I am. I think that's true. You know, so there was 14 seconds where you know what I mean, weren't telling a joke, but people were like, oh, I'm listening to that guy. And that's really cool that you're stepping out of the like, da, 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 da. And not more than anything, I wanted to share this with you, my favorite moment, but Billy's Funniest last year, it happens. They're tallying the votes, that horrible time when they're tallying the votes, and you have to go up and basically do your set and almost vamp for
And
these.
this is not, and by the way, this is not a brag, but I think that I have hosted more Philly's Funniest than anybody in history, just because because you always host the year after you,
Yeah.
and so I host all those, and then like it was like year 2 after me where they decided to go to a different format where like they switch people up because like the one guy I think had moved up to New York, so then they kind of got me. So like I've done so many of those, and they just, I mean, again, it's muscle. And but it's hard work, and you're just swinging the bat, and it's the fucking worst.
So you're basically, it's like 10 people have gone up. This was the semifinals. So it's like people who are good at comedy, obviously, they're doing good. Now you have people who are there who are full of chicken fingers, beer, and hope for their son from Bradford, New Jersey, that he's gonna make it, you know?
Yeah.
And you go up and you're telling jokes, and I could tell there was like this thing. Maybe it's just me, but you were like, you do the joke and it's in your album, but you're like, I was driving with my wife and she was on Facebook, and you paused, and you were like, and so was I, and just the crowd like lost it, and I was like, he is such a comedian that he knew that he had to wait for that. You know what I mean? It had to like, it was awesome. It was like one of my favorite moments in comedy so far.
Oh, thank you.
Like, you just just like casted a spell on these half asleep people. It was it was amazing. Yeah.
And you know what it is, and thank you, I really appreciate that. And I think that comes from a couple of things. So first of all, I was a 4th grade teacher for over 10 years. Like while I was doing I was teaching 4th grade during the day, doing stand up at night and on the weekends. And so I think I got a lot of crowd control. It's like when you have to deal with 25 9-year-olds all day, you have to hold their attention and do different things to like either subtly or not so subtly keep their attention. So you can definitely put a room full of drunk people in front of me, and it's basically like 9-year-olds. You know, it's like you do the same types of things. So I definitely got a lot of work out of that. And the one thing that I did, I remember my buddy Kent Haynes, who was one of the first Philly's Funniest winners. He's actually a teacher now and does really well. He does a lot of math stuff online, and like he's becoming this like really big name in like math education. But he was one of the big like early success stories from my time. He won Philly's Funniest. He got on Live at he was on Comedy Central's Live at Gotham. He was gonna be big, and then he just decided, I don't want to do anymore, and he just quit. And but he's so funny. But we were living together for a while. I've lived with a bunch of comedians through the years. But I was like, when I was doing longer sets, you know, when I was finally moving up to feature, you know, I was doing 30 minutes instead of 10 or whatever. And I was like, I kept telling him, I was like, I feel this lull, like around minute 18 or so. And like, I know I have in my back pocket, like my best joke or two at the end, so I can kind of win them over at the end with a closer. But I felt like there was this like 8 to 10 minute lull, and like, what's going on? And he's like, I think what it is, he's like, all of your jokes are 40 seconds long. Look at all your jokes. They're all, it's bop, 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 you know? And then I was like, oh, they are. And you said it too, it's like you lull them into that rhythm where they they know the rhythm. So it's not much of a surprise, which obviously comedy's a lot about surprise. And then so they just get lulled into that. So then I learned, I was like, okay, a couple of things. Like, first of all, I started doing different types of jokes. You know, your premise jokes, like those 40-second jokes, one-liners, and then stories, you know? So instead of doing joke, 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 I was doing joke, joke, one-liner, story, joke, joke, story, one-liner. And so it keeps them on their heels. They don't know which way they're going. And then another thing too is my biggest fear, most of our biggest fears when you first start out, is silence. It's like, you don't want silence. It's the worst thing in the world. Yeah. So, I mean, you can tell me now, like, tell for me now, I'm already a fast talker. But back when I first started, I couldn't stop, and there was no stopping me. And I just kept talking because it's like, if the energy keeps coming out, there's no time for silence. So everybody can either keep laughing or just keep listening. And then I realized that what I used to be afraid of is now literally my favorite thing in comedy is silence. Because if I'm telling a story and I go for a pause and everybody's listening and there's silence, that means everybody's listening to me. They're waiting for the next thing. If I go for that pause and I hear 5 different conversations going on, that's my biggest fear now, because it's like, oh, I'm not connected with them. But if you can hear a pin drop in the room, I have them, you know? So it's like, it's good or bad. So like, I'll play with that rhythm a lot sometimes and you know, that just comes in timing, comes in doing it, but it's like where I can freeze for a little bit or pause or like take a breath here, or, you know, go faster here, go loud, go soft, you know, do a little Pixies action, you know, and it's and just to keep people on their heels and like, just give them a break and step back for a second. And that can really just bring your jokes from one level to another level. So that's why I like telling stories in my sets, because it's like you can do that roller coaster a bit more than just, so you can do it with jokes too, but I do love those pauses that I can do. And it's all about just manipulating people. You know, it's about manipulating the crowd to like, all right, you're drunk at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night for a comedy competition and you're not even comedy fans. Yeah. So how can I keep your attention? And you don't want to hear from me too. Like, I know going on that stage, they want nothing to do with me. And like, so I have to temper my expectations and know that like, hey, and even call it out, like, again, being in the moment, be like, look, they're going to tally the scores soon. I don't want to be here either. You know, kind of like joke about it and like let them know that like, we're just going to fuck around here for a little while. I'm sorry. Can I curse on it? I apologize.
Yeah, you're absolutely fine. We're on Apple Podcasts. You're allowed
Apple
to curse.
Podcast. Oh, darn it.
You know, you can get on Apple Podcasts. You can get on Apple Podcasts by applying to get on Apple Podcasts. It's I thought there was like some
I'm writing that down right now. I'm going to figure that out.
I was like, when we started, I was like, all right, I'm going to apply for Apple Podcasts now. And someone was like, you wait like 4 days, blah, blah, blah. And then it was like, you're accepted. I was like, wait, what?
Yay!
Yeah, okay.
They love me.
But the council, a dais of like very old men with long beards, are like, shall we allow another podcast?
They're all just Steve Jobs.
They're all just wearing black mock turtlenecks and dad jeans.
Everybody like, with Steve Jobs in a big like vat of blue liquid, just like
just floating.
Horrible.
It's not even a vat. It's just one of those old Apple monitors that are like orange in the back. You know,
Do you think he's frozen like Sylvester Stallone in Demolition Man? Like he's just in that? Do they have him
Yeah.
frozen?
If you got that frozen money, why would you not? Like that, you have to. You have to.
Freeze up, baby.
Yeah.
Freeze up.
Freeze it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's definitely, I think, when all the blue liquid goes out, it's the Apple booting your computer up sound. It's like, dum, you know, and it falls out. Big, fucking, very pale. God, I was thinking about. You talk a lot about like comedy science, which I think is something that we're really about, is getting into the mindset of that. And we want to talk more about you, but is there anyone else that comes to mind when you've had conversations where you've dished that's like a really noteworthy comedy scientist that people should check out their stuff because they've got such a headspace on it?
Yeah. You know, I've been lucky. I've been like working with a lot of great comics over the years, and you know, we talk about that. You know, somebody who's always been really good is a buddy of mine, Jeff Tate. Do you guys know Jeff Tate? He's on the Doug Loves Movies podcast a lot with Doug Benson. He lived in Philly for a little while, and we've just always been friends. He's been on the road a lot, so like he's just got that insight. I think one of my biggest comedy scientist influences, I've been lucky enough. I've worked with Todd Glass for years, and Todd I started with literally, I think 2005 is the first time I worked with him at the Cherry Hill Comedy Cabaret. It was before Helium opened. And that was the first time I happened to be on the show, and then he started having me open for him. But he's just got such a view of like how a show should run, how a club should run, how a show should run. Everything from like how you should act as a comedian to the lighting in the room and the music and the temperature. And comedy is such like a precious little flower, as we know, that like most people don't realize. It's like, all right, go up there and make us laugh. It's like, you know, there's so many other things like the physical setup of the room, the lighting. You know, if the crowd is lit, it's bad for two reasons, because you know, they feel more insecure, so they don't want to laugh in front of people, and they can also see their date, so they want to talk to them. But if they're in the dark, then they don't do that, and they're facing forward. So he's somebody who's so good about like playing with the crowd. And I think it was him, and I guess it was him that, like, the one thing that you do that I've learned is like, he's like, never try to beat somebody. Like if somebody's talking in the crowd, never try to win. He's like, you want to lose to them. So if let's say you're on stage, you're performing, and there is a couple in the front row or 3 rows back who they're drunk and they're starting to have a conversation. Instead of getting louder and talking louder in the mic and trying to beat them, so everybody talking over them, so when he's like, talk softer, just get really quiet, drop the microphone, and just keep telling your joke. And it's so passive aggressive, but it totally works, because if I'm getting quiet, that means everybody needs to lean in a little bit more to hear me. And that also means that they're sticking out like a sore thumb. And 9 times out of 10, they're nice people, because most people are nice people, and they realize it because they hear their own voice for a second and they stop without me ever dealing with it. Or maybe somebody at the table near them will shush them or tell them to be quiet, or a bouncer or whatever will tell them to be quiet. And then I just bring the mic back up, and it's like I've never done anything, but it's just like those little things that you lose to them, you know? So it's sometimes it's those little things of just like holding a crowd's attention and keeping them happy and keeping them focused, and you know, dealing with whether it's hecklers or just audience members in general, of like, yeah, this is how you know, the frame of mind of an audience member, like what is a perfect situation for this delicate little flower to grow. And it's like, there's one little thing that goes wrong throws it all off. So if you have the right setup and you can execute it this way, your chances of having a great set are going to go up exponentially.
Yeah. And speaking of that, I was actually going to ask, because I think Todd Glass said you were the funniest person on the internet, which is I think
he might have said that, which is very nice.
Your Instagram is like, it's amazing. It's just like it's almost like a 14-year-old boy runs it, and you're some man like taking pictures of random things. Like, look at this.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not like it's so wholesome. It's like you're not really making fun of it. You know what I mean? But
It's like, you know, it's like one of those things where I think it's my favorite kind of comedy where it's like, yeah, okay, you know how like in gym class, like you get hit in the nuts, right? And it hurts, right? Because you get hit like you get hit with a ball like like you get smack dab and it hurts, right? You might get out of breath. But what's way worse is if a ball or something just glances off of it. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
if you get hit square in the nuts, it hurts. But if somebody accidentally kind of like just slaps you or something like that, and you just randomly get hit just by it's way worse. So like I always try to like, what can I do to just like put it in people's heads and make it silly and like
yeah,
if you're just off the angle a little bit, it's gonna hurt so much more because it's so much more dumb or just so much more rather than like, you know, it's like I can be like fuck you to something or some idea of like and really go after it, or I can like make a fake compliment about it that just
yeah,
hurts so much more, you know. And like that's
yeah,
what I like to do, and I just make it stupid, you know, like I just want it to be like dumb, and that's what I love so much. Like again, it's like that I want to be that 14-year-old because
yeah.
that's when I laughed the most when I was 14. So why not?
Oh yeah. I think yeah, it's like everybody's funny when you're a kid.
Yeah,
Like there's nobody who's like you know what I mean? I
yeah,
mean there was the one kid who was the funniest kid or whatever, but you know
right,
everybody's good. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
Um
The
but
kid
I
that
want to
everybody
ask
shit.
the Todd thing though, like so being as he's obviously as we said was like starting out, we haven't done, you know, things like you've done which are like to us are like these cool road stories and things like that. But you mentioned like, you know, don't push back things like that, but what's it like to actually like so you have to feature for Todd, which means that like you don't want to outshine Todd. Is there a mentality behind that for you, or is it just like I'm just being me and Todd respects me and I just do this kind of deal? I asked because I heard a horror story from a comic. I will not name these comics because this is just awful, but like basically one comic kind of was like the other comic that was headlining, and they were like, yeah, you can't open for me anymore. Like
yeah.
you're too close to me, like things like that.
I think I might know who you're. I'm not going to bring it up, but we'll talk about it
Yeah,
after
I
the
also,
Yeah, actor. Yeah.
And I think I might have been another comic who was on that same week, and I think I know that story.
Okay. Yeah.
We'll talk about that, but I think I know
Yeah.
this. But yeah, we'll not bring it. But yeah, so I mean, there's a couple things too where it's like you want somebody who's like you, but you also want somebody who's different from you. You want a
Mhm.
different voice because you don't want the same thing. I heard, was it Todd or no? It was somebody else that was. Who was it? I think they were. I can't remember. It was I was listening to a podcast and I think it was Paul Reiser. You know, like the big, you know, huge
Mad
comedian
about
back in the
you.
day. Yeah, like
Wow.
Paul Reiser, and like he was a huge comic back in the day. What podcast was I listening to that he was on? That somebody was it Todd? I don't know, but he the way that he would do it is he would literally have like because he was a big touring comedian for years, and he would do it where he would have like a band open for him, or you know, like just like a musical act, maybe like a guy in a guitar, like a singer songwriter, because he's like, I don't want anybody to traverse any of the same ground, you know, like I want to be totally new and you know different. So you do want somebody, but you also want somebody who you get along with on the road. Hey, that's the biggest thing I think,
Mhm.
and you want somebody with that your audience will relate to, too. So and Todd's always been really good because then you hear these stories of, and you'll see it too, where I'll see these headliners, they'll bring some fairly mediocre openers with them, features and or hosts or whatever, because they want to shine. So they're like, okay, I want to be the best. So and like I think Todd always wants somebody funny, and I you know I'm saying myself, but like you know, but like he does it, and he always like one of his things. He's like, look, he's like, do your best stuff. He's like, I want it to be the best show possible. So do your best. So he has that confidence in himself and his relationship with the crowd, where like I never worry about like outshining him. So but like you want to serve the show too, like you want to be a part of the show. So um I want to do what's going to be like, but like he's like, yeah, go for it. He's like, you know, I want you to be, you know, I want you to be as funny as he can. So so I never worry about that, you know, with him. And yeah, I think you know most comics they have their own thing. So hopefully if you've made it to the spot where you're headlining, like I think more than anything, you should be able to handle whatever comes before you. I think that's one of the biggest things. You know, anybody can do to a certain extent, you know, once you have the time, anybody can do an hour. You can stand up there and talk for an hour if you want
Yeah.
to. But you have to be able to be like, I used to really worry. And when I've started to headline, obviously like smaller rooms or whatever, like I don't have the name to like come into a major club and headline for a whole week, but I can do it now. But it's like, I used to kind of get worried about like, oh, who's going to be the opener? Who's doing that? And I would almost try to like, not that I had a say in it, but like kind of prepare like, oh, she's opening for me. He's opening for me. I better be. And then I'm like, no, I can't think like that. I have to deliver and be funny no matter who it is. So hopefully if a comic's like that, if they got to that level, like they should be able to handle whatever comes in front of them. Although unless like it's somebody super filthy or super dark or something like that, like then there's a little bit of like, well, that might not jive well with what I do.
Yeah, I always feel like when people I know, and it's like I think I'm really subscribed to that it takes so long in comedy. Like a lot of people are like, it takes 10 years. And then you kind of understand like, blah, blah, blah. But it's funny because like people will book shows, and Dave and I have both been on the shows where it's like someone is up there, you know what I mean? Like I was on a show and DeRosa headlined, and I was like hosting an opening, and I was like, what? Why am me? Why? This guy is like, he knows what he could go into, mud flat Mississippi and make people laugh, I have like 12 minutes if I fucking like, you know what I mean? My best stuff, whatever. And, I just think that sometimes where I see something and it's like, I booked, Brad Garrett on this show and I'm opening for him. It's like, you talk about like eating ass. Like what is this connect here? It's like,
right.
It's so funny to me when people do that. So that's where that kind of came from, where it's like, I've seen people who are like, yeah, I'm opening for Mark Norman. And I'm like, what? Like, how is this going to work? Like,
right.
Yeah. So it works.
And that's
in
the thing that I think you should too. It's like, give yourself credit. If you're in the room to a certain extent, you belong there. So if and again, there is that thing too about appropriate. And like, by the way, like I'm not gonna shit on like dirty comedy or anything. Like, I love a dirty joke. As funny is funny. If it's clever, if it's dirty for the sake of being dirty, then it's boring. But like if it's funny and dirty, that's great. But like that aside, like sometimes that doesn't always work. But like if you're opening for Joe Rosen, like Joe's a great dude. Like it's like there is a fraternity of like, oh, you're a comedian, I'm a comedian. Like I have a connection with you.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're younger, maybe you're newer, and you're still working out. But like I was there. So it's like we know that. Like unless somebody's really doing something to stink up the room or really like just being filthy and just like turning the audience, walking people or like whatever, you're just like, do his thing, and then like you can go out and kill it. Or you can go out and bomb, and hopefully, and Joe definitely does, and like hopefully I do have the wherewithal to be like, okay, I know how to take the crowd from wherever you leave me from here. So it's like, and trust me, like I've opened for a lot of comedians I probably had no business opening for, but it's like you go in, you do your best, you be respectful, and that's a thing too where I've learned from, like when I got my first TV writing job. I was like, oh my, like I quit my teaching job. I was writing for a TV show. It wasn't a great TV show by any stretch, but like I was writing on television, and I was this very special artist who's being recognized for my talents. And like I'm in this upper echelon of artistic people who are literally within the first week, I realized that wasn't the case at all. Like it's, if you are a comedian, a writer, or what, you might as well be a plumber or a house painter or whatever, because they hire you to come in, do a good job, not be wasted, not sexually harass anybody, not be late, not be, a problem, not get a fight, and then go home quietly. Like that's what they want. They want the show to run, whether it's a TV show or a live, like a stand-up show. Like if you come with a good attitude and be like, hey, I'm going to give it my best. If you're an opener, like I'll do the announcements that I'm supposed to. I'm going to make the comedian look as good as possible. I'm going to give him a great intro the way that he or she wants it. That's all I'm looking for. Like, I don't like, you could be terrible or you could be super funny. And to me, that's so much behind. Like, I realized like when again, like with that writing gig, it was like, oh, I could be replaced tomorrow. Like they have so many other worries as a producer of a show. They want me to come in, show up on time, do my job, not cause trouble, and go home. And that's 80% of it right there. And it's like, you want to be funny, and obviously, like if you're in the door, you're at least somewhat funny, and you're on the show, somebody thought you're funny, and so you want to have confidence in yourself. But as long as you do the professional stuff, that other stuff is, comes, I think, almost comes later to a certain extent.
Yeah. That was it. That's the validation I was looking for. Thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Yeah.
I do appreciate it. Yeah. No, that's really what I like. I really like that. It's like, it's awesome because if you say that to another comedian, I feel like comedians have this heart where they're all like almost therapists at the same time, where they're like, no, man, you know what I mean? But if you suck, I'm pretty sure comedians are like, no, you didn't deserve that.
Right.
But,
yeah. But then there's also like, you also like, people are in different stages of their career that it's like, oh yeah, he's new. So yeah, I'm going to give him, cause I was new and I sucked, and and I thought I was a lot better than I was, I'm sure. But I wasn't that, but like people gave me a chance. So it's like, yeah, so I'm going to give this guy a chance. I'm going to give this girl a chance. Like, and like, I'm not going to be, actually, you know what? One of my biggest lessons in the world came from one of my favorite comics, and probably the coolest person I've ever met in my entire life. I don't know if you guys know Tom Rhodes. If you know Tom Rhodes, who's a great comic. I think he had Comedy Central's first ever special, like the first Comedy Central Presents or Hour was Tom Rhodes. He was this like hippie guy in the 90s, had this like long hair, like very like grunge looking kind of guy. And then he had a sitcom in the 90s on like ABC or something like that lasted a few years. And then he like toured the world. He had his own talk show in Holland for 2 years and like traveled the world. And since then he travels the globe doing comedy, and he's like the coolest guy, and he's just like the funniest dude, just coolest guy. And I've been lucky enough to open for a bunch of times. We did a bunch of New Year's Eves at Helium where I opened for him. And then we became friends. We'd hang out, like he'd crash at my place for a day or two because be traveling all over. And this is years ago, and I wasn't working with him that week. He just happened to be in town, and there was a feature. I don't even remember who it was. It was a young woman who came from like LA or something like that. She flew in, and he didn't know her really, the word on the street that week, because I was like very involved in all the gossip and what was going on in town, and the word on the street was that she was not funny at all, and her sets weren't going well. And we just talked about like how we, that Schadenfreude, like we love that. And it's like, so I just heard that she was terrible. So it was like the last night of the week, I went to Helium just to go hang out and watch the show. And before the show, Tom and I were talking, and I'd heard that she was terrible, and a lot of people had heard. And again, her set wasn't great or whatever. But like, I talked to Tom, and I was like, oh, so how's that going? I heard it's not, and like kind of snickering, heard that's not going too well, right? And he just looks at me and he just goes, she ain't hurting nobody. And I was just like, oh my God, I'm such an asshole. I'm the worst person. He's like, yeah, she's not hurting nobody. Because it was like, she went up and like, she was newer and, like whatever. And like, yeah, her sets didn't go great, but like, he was like, she's not taken away from me. I'm a professional. I can still do my job. I'm going to get laughs, and I could do this. And she's nice. And I'm sure, and I don't even remember who it was. I'm sure she's probably way more successful than I am now, and probably has a great career. But like, it was one of those things where it was just like, oh, I didn't need to be shitty about that. And I always learned that. It was like, yeah, they're new, or like they're trying. It's like, but it's like, yeah, she's not hurting nobody. And I was like, and I always remember that of like, just, stay in your lane, do your thing, and be nice to people. And it's like, what, you don't have to micromanage everything, and you don't have to be a dick about it. It's like, you should be able to handle whatever crowd and whatever comedian comes before you.
Yeah. It's very
it's
good.
It's a nice lesson. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was just like, it was like, yeah. And like, I consider myself a nice person, and like, I'm not outwardly a dick to people but like, it was that thing of that young comic, like, ha, look at this shitty comic, And then I was like, I don't need to do that. That's just shitty. And it's not, and it's not helping me. Like, what's it helping me do? I'm not getting any funnier by making fun of that person. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's definitely an element of that where I feel like the community thing of it all, like it definitely feels like sometimes it feels like in stand-up that there's a less of a supportive element to things, but I feel like when you just look at comedy overall, that is what's really refreshing, is like that, I find with improvisers, there's a lot more supporting each other. With stand-up, sometimes it's just like harsh love kind of a thing. We do like to ask people on the podcast, like, if there was something that you could change, like a lesson that you could bequeath to the comedy community that would instantaneously be brought into the comedy culture around you, do you have an idea of what it would be? More compassionate, more excited, harder work? What would that look like to you?
I think, and I don't want this to come out sounding the wrong way, but for me, I think from a selfish standpoint and just like what I like is, I would love to change and go back to a time where comedy wasn't important. Like, it just wasn't. It was just, we're just clowns and we're just making jokes. And by the way, like, and I don't want that to be like, I hate when people are like, oh, you have to be so PC these days. And like, it's like, no, that's not it at all. Like, I consider I consider myself a very liberal person. I try to always punch up instead of punching down. And I feel like I've grown as a person. Like, there's jokes that I did 10 years ago that I wouldn't do today, because I was like, that's kind of a shitty thing to say, or like a word I wouldn't use anymore. And like, I always want to, but like, and of course it is a work. I mean, look what's going on in the last 48 hours in the world, in this country. We're just in a position where things are bad, and we're in that battle now. We kind of have to fight that battle to a certain extent. And like, I don't know if it goes back to like, I don't know, like maybe like Jon Stewart and The Daily Show, where that became like a political thing, and like the comedy was used as a force, which I love Jon Stewart. I love The Daily Show. And of course, I'm coming this as a straight white male, and I totally understand that, like, I definitely have that privilege, and I don't do that. But like, it's one of those things where I feel like comedians, like the comedians that I watched growing up, and you can always have social commentary, obviously, or like whatever it might be. But like, most of the people that I liked growing up, and when I first started comedy, we were just outsiders. We were losers. Nobody paid attention to us. We were the freaks. It was like, we were just observers of the human condition, and we just like said stupid stuff about it. You know what I mean? And it's like, we stood on the sidelines and just made fun of everything. And it was just like, just make fun of everything. And obviously in the last 20 years, the world has gotten a lot shittier, and it's in a place where I don't like right now. And so I'm glad that there are people out there doing that, and it's like, we are on a side now, or we are a part of that conversation. But it's like, I think there's a lot more scrutiny now of like my tweets, for example. And again, like, me, like, I'm not don't consider myself like an edgy person, or I don't want to say something shitty about a certain, group of people, whatever. But like, it's like, how are my tweets being scrutinized just as much, if not more, than the president of the United States? You know what I mean? And it's like, I always just, it was always just like, I was always a nerdy kid growing up. I was always an outsider. And me and my friends, who were like nice kids, but like, we just watched everything else happen and just stood on the sidelines and made fun of it. And that's what, when I first started, like, that's what comedy was. It was just like, screw it. Like, let's just make fun. Let's blow the whole thing up, And unfortunately now everything's being blown up anyway. And it's like, we have to be a part of that to a certain extent. And it's tough. And again, like I said, I'm very lucky to be, or lucky, or, I understand my privilege of where I am. And it's like, there shit that doesn't affect me that affects other people. And you want to speak out for that. Like, I do want to speak out for certain things, but it's like, I also do selfishly just like making fun of stupid shit. And like, not that I can't do that. Like, I can still do that. Why not? Brian Regan, like, I love Brian Regan. Just talk about silly stuff, and because sometimes comedy is that escape rather than that, like, well, we're going to talk about X, Y, and Z, and here's how it is. And there are great comics that do that, but it's like, I just like, I wish we, and you guys see this too, like on like the message, like the Facebook groups or whatever, where like comedians get in these huge arguments and battles, and like some of it's definitely very righteous and very like, it is something that we need to talk about. But then other things are like, what are you guys talking about? You're just kind of like, let's just tell jokes, but like, again, we're in a point in the world where like, maybe now it's not the time just to tell stupid jokes, so it's tough.
100%. I think that's really cool. I just wanted to like add to that, is like, it's so cool to see a comic talk about this kind of stuff though, where it's like throughout the years. So if you ask me if there's one thing I can change in comedy, I would be like, I hate that people say what the fuck is a punchline. Like I'm like
Yeah.
not like
Yeah.
a comedy
No, but that's definitely
purist.
true. Yeah.
Yeah, a comedy purist, but I'm like, I'm not thinking the big picture as like a comic like yourself. You're like, well, there was this time and now we're in this time. And there's a lot of comics who are like, we need to go back to that time. It's like, no, I know what you're saying, you know what I mean? But you said that really, really
Yeah.
well. And that's
And
awesome.
it's like one of those things, again, I don't want to be taken of like, wait, and like actually Todd Glass has just been talking about this a lot recently. He and I actually talked about it on the phone for like an hour the other day about like, oh, you can't say the R word anymore. It's like, it's like, yeah, no, you shouldn't. Why would you say,
Yeah.
it's like, you don't have to, and so it's not like, I can't make fun of, I can't make fun of gay people anymore. I can't make fun of black people. It's like, yeah, no, you shouldn't do that. Like, that's not what you should, you know what I mean? But it's like that time, it was like, of just being silly. And again, you can just be silly. And that's how I try to model, it's like, again, it's almost like I do want to fight the good fight. And if I can do that, but at the same time, sometimes I just want to stay in my lane and just like, I just want to be funny on Twitter today and just write about something, stupid joke about nothing. Yeah.
I think that's the best. That's the best comedy too. It's like, and then you see people who stand up for it sometimes, and it makes no sense. Where it's like Jerry Seinfeld will talk about that, and you're like, who are you? Who are you lampooning Delta?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
why are you here right now? Like,
Yes.
at all? Like,
Yeah.
those airplane peanuts. And you're like, I love Jerry Seinfeld, and that's why he's funny. But then when he's like, you can't say anything ananymore, it's like, what were you even saying? Like,
Saying that, yeah.
What were you saying?
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was just because we're like close to running out of time. I was wondering if we could. I mean, we've looked back at the past a little bit. I was wondering if we could look a little bit towards the future. A question that we do really love to ask people is about, and especially for someone like you, now that you have 2 albums out, things like that. And we've talked on the podcast a lot about how comedy is this building of skills, identifying a skill and working on that skill.
Yeah.
Could you give people that are listening an idea of like what the next thing that you're excited to build towards is? What's a skill that you're excited to hone within yourself?
Well, the one thing, and this goes like, I think artistically as well as like, the business end of it is what you guys are doing right now, which I'm not doing it, but is podcasting. I'm Mary Radzinski, and I'm sure you guys know Mary, the super funny comedian, one of my best friends. Her and I have been sort of dragging our feet over the past year of putting together podcasts, and we're finally going to start releasing some episodes, and we're really excited about that. And for a couple reasons, because it's like, we can't be in a comedy club right now, so there's that right there. So it's like, can we get our message out? Can we just get our writing energy out of like telling jokes to each other and like letting people hear that? Can we build a fan base or grow a fan base? Can we hopefully maybe make some money at some point, through ads, Patreon, whatever it is. And I think, and just the whole idea of what comedy used to be like, it was the company line when I started. It was like, you work your way up through a club, you become a headliner, you get a late night spot, and then you get a Comedy Central half hour, and then you get to be a writer on a sitcom, or you get to be a writer on Conan, and like, that's just gone so by the wayside. It's so DIY now, of like making your own podcast, making your own web series, writing your own script, whatever it is, and like finding your audience yourself. That's what they want. It could be something as easy as like TikTok or your Instagram live, like was it Andrew Schultz? I think it is. Like he totally subverted the whole, and like Sam Morril and a couple people were like, they're just releasing their album on YouTube, and they're doing better and probably getting more looks than they would if they were on Comedy Central. So I think my thing in the future is like, I've always been very good at like coloring in the lines, and like I try to do my best job coloring in the lines. It's like, oh, there's not really lines anymore. It's like, you got to make your own lines. And like, so I would tell like younger people too, is like, find that thing that you're good at or that you love, that you're passionate about, keep doing stand-up. And like, I'll never not do stand-up, but like, I want to write for TV more. I want to create more of my own content, like through a podcast, through whatever, and build my own crowd so I can go to clubs and my own people show up, rather than like hoping the club's going to have people. It's like, I want to be able to go to Austin and have 300 people show up to see me, which I can't do right now. Just, I don't have that name. But if, let's say Mary and I, we have that podcast and we do it for a while and it grows, maybe we will then, So I think that's the new model of like, find what you like and do it yourself.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Absolutely.
So
It's an uplifting message for the
Yeah.
future.
Yeah, do it yourself, people.
that's the
Yeah,
quote for
right?
the episode right there. Do it yourself.
Do it yourself.
Oh.
Yeah. Who
my
else?
God.
There's nobody. And again, it's like we're also in the Wild West right now too, just with what's going on.
Mhm.
When are comedy clubs going to open again? When are they going to be at capacity again? That could be in the fall, or that could be in 2 years from now. We don't know.
Yeah.
So like, what's the new model, the new stopgap of like, yeah, it's web content. People, some people are like, okay, do stand up on Zoom, but other people are like, no, it doesn't work. But other people are like, well, let's try to make it. So it's being. I'm trying to look at this time rather than like a hindrance of like, let me be creative and figure out what I can do to get, to maybe make money, and just as importantly, like reach people and get followers, get audience members, get people who like me to listen to me.
That's an awesome message. It's like, it always just reminds me of like that guy kicking dirt who's like, oh man, my life's not going great. It's like, but you can change that. Like, so when people are like, stand up on Zoom isn't funny. Okay, but you're still working out the muscles. You're still putting something in there.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that's the thing too about going back to like the Tom Rhodes thing. It's like, she ain't hurt nobody. It's like, well, if you don't want to do stand up on Zoom, don't do stand up on Zoom, but like let other people do it. And you're going to develop a muscle. Again, you said, or like continue that muscle of doing that. And I think that's really important. Like just do it do it that way.
Awesome. Well, Chip, thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. This has
been so much fun.
Episode.
Well, thank you guys for having me.
Insightful.
This is great. Yeah. This is great. I love talking shop. So we could have done this for 4 hours, and this is great.
I'm gonna stop recording now. Thank you for listening to So Tell Us Podcast. I'm Jared McCallie.
I'm David Feinberg. Thank you guys so much for listening.
All right. See you later.